On October 7th, 2023, the world woke up to a nightmare. In a surprise assault, Hamas launched an unprecedented attack on Israel, marking one of the deadliest days in the country's history since its founding in 1948. Thousands of rockets rained down on Israeli cities, while hundreds of heavily armed militants stormed into Israeli territory by land, sea, and even using motorized paragliders. The timing was symbolic. The attack coincided with the Jewish holiday of Simchat Torah, catching civilians and the Israeli Defense Forces completely off guard. The immediate devastation was horrifying. Entire families were massacred in their homes. Communities near the Gaza border, like Sderot and Kfar Aza, became scenes of unimaginable brutality. Militants executed civilians, took hostages, and torched homes. Over 1,200 Israelis were killed in a single day, including women, children, and the elderly. The images shocked the world: bodies lying in the streets, families burned alive, and concert-goers at a music festival slaughtered in cold blood. This was not just a military operation. It was psychological warfare. Hamas had meticulously planned this attack for months, possibly even years, bypassing Israel's much-vaunted intelligence services. Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system, though intercepting hundreds of rockets, was overwhelmed by the sheer volume. It was a strategic failure that shook the Israeli security establishment to its core, but Israel's response was swift and ferocious. Within hours, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declared that Israel was at war. A full-scale military mobilization was ordered, with 300,000 reservists called up, the largest mobilization in Israel's history. The message was clear: Hamas would pay an unprecedented price. The Israeli Air Force launched relentless airstrikes on Gaza, targeting Hamas leadership, command centers, weapons depots, and tunnels. Gaza, one of the most densely populated places on Earth, quickly turned into a war zone. Entire city blocks were reduced to rubble. The strikes were surgical in intention but devastating in impact. Civilian casualties mounted, with the Palestinian death toll rising sharply. Israel's strategy was not just punitive, but also aimed at crippling Hamas's military infrastructure. The Israel Defense Forces implemented a complete siege of Gaza, cutting off electricity, water, fuel, and humanitarian supplies. The goal was to isolate Hamas, starve its war machine, and weaken its hold over Gaza. However, this blockade further worsened the humanitarian crisis, drawing sharp criticism from international organizations and some world leaders. Amidst the airstrikes, Israel prepared for a potential ground invasion. Tanks and infantry units massed at the Gaza border. For days, there was speculation whether Israel would enter Gaza to dismantle Hamas completely. The memories of past incursions, like Operation Protective Edge in 2014, loomed large. Yet this time, the scale of the planned retaliation seemed far greater. Hamas, on the other hand, continued its rocket barrage, launching missiles deeper into Israeli territory, reaching as far as Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. Hezbollah in Lebanon also fired rockets into northern Israel, raising fears of a wider regional conflict. Israel responded with artillery and airstrikes, trying to prevent a two-front war. The conflict became a global flashpoint. The United States stood firmly behind Israel, sending aircraft carrier strike groups to the eastern Mediterranean as a deterrence against Iran and Hezbollah. Western nations condemned Hamas's atrocities, but also urged Israel to exercise restraint to avoid a humanitarian catastrophe. Iran's involvement loomed in the background. As a key backer of Hamas and Hezbollah, Tehran's influence on the conflict was undeniable. However, both Iran and Israel seemed wary of escalating into a direct confrontation, preferring to fight through proxies. Meanwhile, the human cost kept rising. Gaza's civilian infrastructure crumbled. Hospitals were overwhelmed. The lack of power, clean water, and medical supplies created a dire situation. On the Israeli side, the trauma of the October 7th attack was profound. Families mourned their dead, while the country grappled with the psychological scars of a brutal assault on its heartland. Amid the chaos, hostage situations became a critical issue. Hamas had taken over 200 Israelis captive, including women, children, and even foreign nationals. These hostages became bargaining chips in Hamas's hands, complicating Israel's military response. Every airstrike risked the lives of the captives, forcing Israel into a delicate balancing act between military objectives and humanitarian considerations. As days turned into weeks, international pressure for a ceasefire grew. The United Nations called for immediate de-escalation. Arab nations condemned Israeli bombings, but were wary of Hamas's actions as well. Egypt and Qatar tried to mediate, attempting to broker a humanitarian pause. But Israel remained steadfast. For the Israeli leadership, this was a war for national survival. The aim was not just deterrence, but the complete dismantling of Hamas's military capabilities. Netanyahu's government argued that failing to respond decisively would embolden Israel's enemies and compromise its security in the long term. The war also had political ramifications. Domestically, Netanyahu faced mounting criticism for the intelligence failures that allowed such a devastating attack. However, the war temporarily united a fractured Israeli society around a common cause, eliminating Hamas's threat. On the battlefield, Israel employed a combination of precision strikes and massive bombardments. Using satellite-guided bombs, bunker-busting munitions, and real-time intelligence, they targeted Hamas's underground tunnel network, known as the Gaza Metro. This vast subterranean labyrinth was crucial for Hamas's operations, providing safe movement for fighters and storage for weapons. In response, Hamas adapted its tactics, launching hit-and-run attacks, using human shields, and spreading its operations into civilian areas, making Israel's task even more challenging. The urban warfare scenario in Gaza was brutal, with Israeli forces often encountering booby-trapped buildings and ambushes. Despite the ferocity of the Israeli response, eliminating Hamas entirely proved to be an elusive goal. Hamas's ideology, deeply rooted in resistance against Israel, meant that even decapitation strikes on leadership figures did not deter new leaders from emerging. The conflict thus entered a grinding phase, where both sides inflicted heavy damage, but neither could claim outright victory. As the war dragged on, its ripple effects were felt globally. Protests erupted worldwide, with supporters of both Israel and Palestine clashing in major cities. Social media became a battleground of narratives, misinformation, and propaganda. The information war was as intense as the military one. By the end of 2023, the war had already altered the geopolitical landscape. Israel's military dominance was reaffirmed, but the humanitarian cost in Gaza sparked international outrage. Hamas, though battered, managed to survive and even gained symbolic victories in the eyes of its supporters. The war raised critical questions about the future of Israeli-Palestinian relations. Would this conflict lead to a broader regional war involving Iran, Hezbollah, and other militant groups? Or would it eventually force a reconsideration of long-term solutions, however elusive they seemed? One thing became clear. The Hamas attack on October 7th and Israel's ferocious counterattack would be remembered as a defining moment in Middle Eastern history. A stark reminder of the unresolved grievances, the brutal cost of asymmetric warfare, and the fragile balance of power in one of the world's most volatile regions. The scars of this war will linger, for the families who lost loved ones, for the hostages still held in Gaza, for the civilians trapped between political ideologies and military strategies, and for a region perpetually on the brink, where peace remains a distant, flickering hope.